on the vertical because they're sort of making up for what the lower legs should be doing. And ultimately, the lower legs should be where that force is actually coming from, and that will allow us to not overtune the downward pull that your body has, and it'll sort of balance. So that way, like if you're climbing and you don't have anything for your legs to go up against, you'll be just doing a pull up. But if your legs are going up against something, you'll be able to lift yourself with those. Yeah, this is my testing. This is my workshop. I just keep pulling things into here. The doors have been something I've been working on a little bit, where I've been trying to come up with. It's amplifying right now. So right now it's more of it's amplifying my input by like 10x right now, which is this interesting experiment I was doing. It's definitely not what we'll be doing, but the idea is that coming up with systems where we can amplify input. So like when you grab onto something, you're able to pull and it goes a little bit extra. So it's overtuned right now, but that's the concept is that. Oh, yeah, you guys haven't seen this guy yet. I'll throw that away. Of course, this guy. But yeah, what else do you guys want to talk about?
So this is kind of like a stupidly specific technical thing, but like you mentioned how you were kind of like with, I think it was particularly with regards to locomotion, you were like using a PID controller that went beyond just the first derivative, so it kind of went into like jerk and jounce.
Mm-hmm.
Like how exactly did you get to that sort of point? Like what led to how exactly are you using it? Because like I'm trying to make something similar if I'm being honest, but
yeah,
it's all kind of janky. It kind of pops around a lot, so I was just kind of wondering how you got to sort of higher derivatives feeling and the higher derivatives and how you got it to just generally be so smooth.
Yeah, you were asking me before about that, right? It was how to how to the friction up on the foot and have it not glitch out. And I was giving the unfortunate news that it glitching out, like turning the friction up. Essentially, the low friction is just hiding the error, and when you turn the friction up high, you're getting enough traction to expose your error, right? Is the way I would think of it. And so rather than going to this just doesn't work at higher friction, I would encourage you to focus on it being that the high friction is actually just showing me like trust that the system is relatively bug free. And I guess thankfully because we have the example of BoneWorks out there, you can take my word for it that we did manage to get it working in a way that it doesn't do that. And so it's really just there's got to be a bug in the math somewhere that's causing it to overshoot or undershoot. Likely, if what was your artifact exactly? It was like you were skidding out, right? Or it was like getting too much traction, overshooting, and jittering back and forth.
Yeah, along something along those. Yeah, it was kind of like just a little bit too slidey, and then the amount of slidiness was sort of inconsistent, so it was just generally not a great experience.
Gotcha. It was too slidey, you said, or was it jittery? Slidey.
It was like it was like a mix. So it was like sliding, but the amount it was sliding by was like variable. So it was.
You were trying to add in a system that was keeping track of the debt as well, right?
So sorry.
Like you were taking the delta of whether it overshot or undershot, and then trying to add it in later. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd recommend trying to strip that out first and just try to get it working without that and like really high friction. So basically, just give it no ability to slide through high friction, and then try to just get the math right without that aspect. And once you get that right, add in the rest of it.
Okay. Thanks. It's really cool that like you kind of communicate about this sort of stuff far more often than I think a lot of other developers do, and it's just it's really neat, and it makes me want to get into this sort of stuff in the future. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. No, my thought on it is that, I mean, when we started doing the Freddie W channel 10 years ago, we did a similar thing where we had the behind the scenes channel. And interestingly, we got a bunch of feedback from the industry where they're like, you guys shouldn't be telling your secrets because you're just going to hurt yourself by doing that. And Freddie and I never bought into that. We didn't think that was, it just didn't sound right, because the way we came up with the stuff was, pre YouTube, that was like, it was finding, certain forums and just small communities of people talking about how they were doing it. And that's how we learned. So it's like, why, as soon as you find some success with it, try to cut off the community from that communication just because you're in the lead with it, So right now with BoneWorks, it feels like we're one of a handful that's in the lead with it. So that same logic would apply, where it's like, oh, cut off to try to not share your secrets. But one, that's just not a very fun way to develop. I don't think that's not a very fun way for VR to come about. And two, we don't want to develop it by ourselves or with a couple other developers. We want to have a bunch of different, smart people putting their thoughts in there and trying different angles. So a lot of what we talk about is trying to think of what do we think there's still there's lots of room for different ideas on, or it's like maybe we're totally missing. Maybe we're so tunnel vision on the way we're doing it that there's a different way to do it. Like the locosphere, right? And so we put out how we're doing the locosphere, and then start seeing other people do that and see if anybody comes up with a better way to do it. And then similarly now that I'm starting to have an idea where I think there's a different direction to go. I'm not going to talk about it too much yet because I want to make sure that I'm actually going to do it, because I'd hate to tell you guys all about it and then I work on it this weekend and then I decide, I'm like, no, never mind, that's a silly idea, because it's not even my first idea of what to replace it with. I've gone through a couple different iterations. Alex can attest to that. But like 1 week I'll be like, I know I'm going to do it this way, and then the next week I'm like, okay, I know I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way, and then the next week. So it's still not solid yet. But I think, just like I thought before, I think the current one is going to be the way to go. So once we get it down, we'll start talking about it more. But the beauty is, now that BoneWorks is out, you guys actually have like the example in hand of what we've been doing. You guys don't have the last most of the last year of what we've been doing. So a big reason why we've been so quiet is because we've been working sort of on the core stuff with a lot of time, and so we've been sort of overhauling a lot of systems. And it's not the most exciting stuff, but the result is exciting, which is a good foundation to build on top of. And we're starting to get to the point where we're really happy with what it looks like and what it's doing. And so hopefully we'll start talking again very soon about it, like get some videos out. And today I was like, man, I really need to get a video out. I'm like, I should film some videos this weekend. But instead I was like, I'll just pop on live here just for now, so we at least get this for sure. And then hopefully we get some videos out in the very near future. Because essentially we've been working on 1.6 has been largely completed, or is completed. It's pretty much ready to go. It just needs to be pushed. And then we've been working on the stuff beyond 1.6, which is both for BoneWorks as well as for future games.
Any little hints on what's going to be in 1.6?
Any hints? I think I'll save the actual content. So it's all focused around one theme. It's more of a content pack. It's not like it doesn't have the iterative player improvements that we did in the previous one. So that'll be like the next one after 1.6. But it's gonna be content, and I think you guys will like it a lot. It's gonna be setting up some different space for VR for us to segue into the next stuff. So I think you guys will like it. But yeah, that's vague. That's not a hint. I mean, I could just tell you what it is in one word, or in two couple words, but it's like, then I'll let you guys wait for the video, yeah. It won't feature the triangle stuff, is what I'm saying, that I was talking about in the beginning of this, because that's part of the core stuff that we're working on. That'll show up in BoneWorks and the next title later.
Has COVID affected future games?
Oh yeah, for sure. COVID's affected everything, man.
Yeah.
The whole industry. Well, Alex and I, we were joking about this the other day. We're like, have you guys heard the 80% number where every company's like, oh, we're at 80% speed since COVID. We're at 80% speed. Somehow that number has gone around and stuck. And I feel like 80% is the dream. I feel like in reality, I don't think anybody's at 80% right now. You're seeing a lot of it in the whole game industry. Like the launch lineup for the consoles was limited because of it, right? It seems like the 2021 slate is pretty limited. They're definitely not playing it up or promising a lot of things. Developers really just got slowed down by it. You look at like Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk got pushed easily 6 months just due to it. So yeah, to say that anyone, I mean, maybe there's some company out there that somehow managed to not get affected at all, but I don't like. It's a pretty major shift around, but it's also for the better, I think, in some ways, because it forced us to try something that we talked about for years, which is more of a work from home approach. And so everybody's essentially had to do the crash course, and because every company did it at the same time, it's interesting because everybody stomachs the same setback due to like trying to learn that. And then now as we transition next year, ideally, everybody will be transitioning back to a more hybridized thing, especially in tech. You see, like many people are going full time work from home, and it seems like every tech company is going towards like a sort of hybridization. So it should debottleneck a little bit, but yeah, no, it's definitely like it'd be a lie to say that things don't get slowed down by that stuff.
What is the plan for BONEWORKS merchandise, if you ever are going to do that?
There isn't really a plan right now, but we definitely have heard you guys that you guys want it. We should do something. We should set some stuff up. It just hasn't been. Basically, we've just been focusing all our stuff on either content or engineering, right? It's either content or working on the core. That's also like I don't know if it was one of you guys, but somebody, when I tweeted about the BONEWORKS sale today, someone was asking about duck season. People ask about ports, like a duck season port for Quest or a BONEWORKS port for Quest. And like, obviously we're thinking about everything. We're thinking like, should we? But our priority, the argument always comes down to, it's like, how do we get as far as we possibly can in the next 10 years? How do we use our time now to just go as quick as we can? Because everything we've seen from our experience developing BONEWORKS sort of reaffirmed this idea that we're nowhere near the ceiling as far as how good VR can get. And so any time that's sort of spent min-maxing like current VR seems like it's not as good of a long-term thing as putting all that time into accelerating how fast we can get to what we think VR can become. Does that make sense?
Can I just ask, is there anything to do with shotgun? Because it says 12 gauge and Winchester in your Unity project.
Which one?
If you go to the top of the create bit. Oh.
Am I still streaming?
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a shotgun.
Yeah.
That looks nice.
Yeah, it's the duck season shotgun.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was a model that we had this model at the time. There wasn't a good Remington 870, so we had that model made for duck season. So it's like, so obviously that's the shotgun we want to use again. But yeah, no, I mean, shotgun is. I've talked about the shotgun a little bit. I don't know how. The problem is like I don't know how widespread it goes. Like obviously we've had that on the to-do list forever, and I don't know how wide the message has gotten. That essentially our to-do list for the shotgun is do a full cleanup pass on the entirety of the core of BONEWORKS, and then the reward for getting through that is that making a shotgun is way easier and simple. So it's like we could have just made a shotgun right after launch using the current tools and kind of hacked it together, but we sort of use it as like the carrot to dangle on the stick for ourselves to be, all right, make it so that the cylinder grip properly solves with your other hand. I guess that requires a little more explanation for how like the core of BONEWORKS works. A lot of the idea behind BONEWORKS is that rather than when you grab something with two hands, what most games do is they switch over from driving the two hands independently to instead driving the object. And that's actually how the first video, when we first showed BoneWorks, the demo where it was still the Steve character model, that's what we were doing too. Was when you grabbed it with one hand, and you grabbed a gun, instead of you controlling your hand, which is attached to the gun, you were controlling your gun hand. And when you grabbed it with two hands, instead of controlling two hands, you were controlling the whole thing as a one thing. So it was a single PD controller for that whole unit. And that's how Half-Life Alyx is doing it, and that's how Saints and Sinners is doing it. I think that's how almost every physics game that does two-handed is doing it like that. And the reason for that is that you can get pretty dang good results pretty fast. But the original reason why we went quiet for like 6 months after we showed, actually probably more than 6 months, but after we did that first video, is that at that point we decided we should make it so you're controlling both of your hands at all times, rather than controlling the object as a unit. And that's kind of why you see like the hands on BoneWorks when you're able to move around, you can still update what your hands are doing. They still do rotation updates. Is that the controllers are still driving the forces into your left and right hand, and that's what's driving the gun around. And we wanted to do that because we figured that was the way that we were going to be able to have accurate strength and kind of solve for more situations. And when we did that, we quickly realized that we had a lot of force that was lost, because if you grabbed onto the gun with two hands and your hands were actually farther apart or closer together, that your left hand would be like pushing the gun in against your right hand, even though they're just locked to it so you couldn't see it visually. If you drew out the force vectors, they'd be competing with each other. So you'd be like dumping half of your force was just you trying to, essentially your character was trying to crush the gun or rip the gun apart, even though that's not possible. So what we wanted to do is create a somewhat of an IK solve, and this is largely what Jeremy's work has been centered on, is take the pose that you're feeding it and separate the hands with what the grips say they can be separated. So if the grips are 0.5 meter apart and your hands are 0.7 meters apart, feed the physics engine a directive of where your hands want to be that's 0.5 meter apart. So basically we're saying, hey, this is not a crushable object. That's not a feature of the game right now. So therefore you wouldn't want to try to crush it. Just like in real life, when you hold something with two hands, you don't try to squeeze your muscles together to squeeze it to crush it. So a big shortcoming of the version of BoneWorks that you guys have is that it solves really well for two target grips, where it's just a singular point, like this gun. Are you guys getting my mouse cursor as well?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so when you grab onto, the reason why the MK18 feels a lot better to hold than the MP5 in the current build you guys have is that on the MK18, this is a target grip and a target grip, so this is a single point, and we're solving for that really well in the math that you guys have. But this one is a cylinder and a target, and the cylinder is not solving correctly in the version that you guys have right now. And so what we did is, and then same with the shotgun pump, it would not be solving correctly if we gave it to you guys right now. But what we've been doing all year has been we essentially, Jeremy went through the math and cleaned it out and made it so that the cylinder grip solves just as well as the target grip. So now we can have target grips that are just as good as or cylinder grips are as good as the target grip. And that makes it, and that's what really unlocked the shotgun. And then as an extension of that, he did the sliding of it and stuff like that. So really we're just trying to figure out how to make all the different configurations of possible grips solve equally well. So we don't have a better aiming experience when you do the angled foregrip with the gut grip than if you do a cylinder with the main grip.
Well, we're on the topics of weapons. I'm curious, how did you guys balance them between being video gamey and between being quote unquote realistic? Because I know if you go into other VR games that are a little more accurate, like H3 VR, where you have to reload and everything and really turn off the safety and yada yada yada. How did you guys balance it so that it still felt realistic, but it was manageable within the combat?
I think that's still a balance that we're trying to hit, but or ideally we offer it in a perfect world, we'd let it be a little bit more user definable to slide between a more, depending on your preference. If you wanted it to be an arcadey to hardcore slider, that would be the perfect world. Right now we're kind of as designers, we're picking that balance for you guys, right? We're picking where we wanted. So the big thing that we wanted is that we were trying to choose guns that would have a similar enough reload action that we could kind of get the same steps in their head, so that when they encountered a new gun, they knew that everything was some sort of a, put the mag in, rack it in some way. Like it might be, the rack might be in it might be a pull slide versus, they're different spots, but it's the same similar like rhythm for the guns. And then the shot that was for launch, and then obviously the shotgun is a different rhythm. The shotgun, you have to single work the action to get the next
I love
chamber
the
in.
MP5 slap. I just want to say that now.
You love what?
The MP5 slap.
Good. I'm glad you like it. Yeah, that's you'll like the MP5 a lot better now after this eventually comes up, just because the cylinder grip is solving so well now.
How long are you planning to support BoneWorks for? Is it going to be going like updates coming out or patches coming out even after new games release?
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. That's something that we don't really have a clear like decision on. Like the plan right now is for the foreseeable future. Like there's like everything. Like you'll notice that I'm still working in the BoneWorks project every day. The reason why I'm working in the BoneWorks every day is that the idea is that it's going to be forward compatible. So that the work that we're doing here is going to go both to BoneWorks as well as to the next titles, like in the core, because we don't want that compatibility to sever yet. At some point, we have to move on, just because the merit is like, is it worth making the team bigger to keep content updates going to BoneWorks forever, or in a perfect world, you guys have already sort of gotten mods going in a way that does that. So in a perfect world, there's a time where we can focus, because we want to keep the team small in order to be able to move fast, but also support things. So we haven't had to cross that bridge yet, because we don't have the next game ready to ship yet. But yeah, it's kind of figuring out that balance, right? Because we want to be iterative, we want to keep making things, we want to keep getting new things out. That's how we're gonna meet the main goal of getting from point A to as far as we can in 10 years with VR. So that's really the thought process we go through. So yeah, I mean, you're thinking about it, I'm thinking about it too. I don't really know.
Do you have any idea what like the physics limitations would be on Quest hardware?
Not bad. I mean, I have a pretty good idea. Quest, particularly Quest 2, is way more. The processor had a bigger jump in the GPU, right? So the limitation is more in the rendering side of things. It's actually got a pretty good CPU. So in terms of, if it wasn't for depending on what art you put on it, that's what's more going to bottleneck you. Essentially, like if you spawn a bad guy that's just capsules, like that. Say take away the skin mesh, if it's just capsules, it's like you could have a lot more of those guys than if you throw the skin mesh on there, because the skin mesh is starting to get into the GPU. So, so it's like most of your physics budget will end up getting eaten up by the art, depending on the art complexity. But processor-wise, it's in a really good spot. We're like really happy with the amount of power that it has. Like if you put gray boxes, it would be able to run everything. It's just a matter of drawing everything and running physics.
I know you talked about the cylinder grip solver. How do you approach solvers? Is it like per interaction based, or
Yeah. So the goal is that in order to make it as less labor intensive, is things are pretty much dictated by universal rules. So there's not a whole lot of per interaction tuning. We're trying to limit how much whatever can be like a hard rule that we can make, like, oh, this is how a handgun aims, right? Like if you look at a handgun, it's like when you got the handgun virtual controller, you have like a weighting of the handgun's weighted to be the twist and the swing are weighted entirely to the primary hand, and the look rotation is non-existent because your hands are stacked on top of each other when you're grabbing it two-handed. Whereas then you have like a rifle, is a blend of those two things. So the rifle, you have it's 85% look on this one, and then 25% swing and twist, and 0.1% swing as the weighting between the backhand or the primary hand and the second hand. So we're trying to make it so that that's not stuff that really needs to be tuned, and instead making more generic rules for like if your hands are this far apart on the grips, that's how they drive, stuff like that. Because yeah, right now we're trying to, the more stuff we can keep as pure physics while having the ability to tune it into something that's really fun, and not having it just be, you know, like wishing that we could tune it a certain way to make it more fun. The more we can keep it as just physics, the more we can make things quickly with a small number of people.
How big are you guys now in terms of like studio size?
I think we're like 12 people.
It's a really healthy amount.
Yeah, is that a good count? I'm trying to look at 1, 5, 6. Yeah, I think we're 12 people plus maybe 13, somewhere in there. Yeah.
I was saying this is less of a my question, more Wannabe Spaceman was asking in VC. What's like the approach for SLZ on deciding what they're adding to the game, or like what they want to cut?
Approach for say that
like deciding what's worth adding to the game out of like what you planned, and deciding what to cut out of what you planned.
You mean like when a launch comes up?
Yeah.
Really, it's just a matter of it's just the question is like, what's the best thing we can make with the resources that we have, you know? So there's a certain time of, like right now we're in a phase of how do we set ourselves up for the future, which is you know, work on the core stuff, and then the closer we get to like actually shipping, the more we go into, okay, now that we have this date sort of circled on the calendar, what's the absolute best look at this we can put in there? What's the best thing? So like approaching the end of BoneWorks, we really wanted to make sure it came out in 2019, right? We didn't want to push off that December. Well, we didn't announce an actual date for a long time, because essentially all 2019 we were just like in ASAP mode, right? We're just trying to finish it.
Yeah.
And then we finally got it to lock in a date in like November. We're like, okay, it's coming December 10th, which is also the date that Cyberpunk shows. Glad to see them choose our date.
They specially chose just for you guys.
I like to think that was the only thing in their decision. I guarantee they chose December 10th for the exact same reason we did, which is you start looking at the end of the year, and because of Thanksgiving sales and Black and Christmas sales, and there's not that whole much time, and they want to come out on either like a Tuesday or a Thursday always, right? And so you end up there's not a whole lot of dates to choose from. So anyone that says they're coming out in December, you can always look at a calendar and
you just end up getting crammed in that one slot.
Yeah, like you only have like 3 Tuesdays to choose from and 3 Thursdays to choose from, and that tends to be what people pick. So if you're ever making a bet on a date for a game and you know they're coming in December, just look at a calendar and you might guess right.
It's just the date. It's just the launch date for games with a yellow theme.
Yeah, but anyways, like so going back to the mentality we had with BoneWorks, it was constantly doing check-ins with like, all right, what? Because like everybody else, I like to think like everybody else. Hopefully, some people are better than this, but we certainly aren't. Is that we think that we can accomplish 10 times more stuff in a week than we do, right? Like every time, you're like I'm gonna do that, and you're like, you're lucky if you do one of them.
Definitely relate to that.
Right, like I think that's just a universal human thing. If you're not doing that, you're not being ambitious enough with what you want to try to get done, or maybe you're just healthier than we are, and you are honest with yourself. But we were definitely doing the like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and then we check in a month, and like this is how much we got done, and so let's adjust our projections based on that, right? Like we're probably going to be able to get that much done, and so we wanted to deliver the most satisfying narrative arc that we could with the game, so it felt like a completed thought. And then we also wanted the tech to be as stable as we could through the whole thing. So it was a balance between that. Like towards the end, most of it was working on less on core stuff, more on like sound design, getting the narrative beats in,
making it all like feel like a game.
Yeah, because it's like, well, you switch modes at a certain point. At one point, it's like you're trying to get the core tech to be as solid as possible, and so that's like the real quality of it. And then at a certain point, you switch over to like, okay, let's do sound design, which is like which is where you actually get to see how good the thing you made is.
You get to really see it like come together into something.
Yeah, so it's weird to say that sound design isn't like a real improvement because it is, but that it tends to be like it's this polished pass where you get to sort of it's like harvesting the fruit. You know, you do all the work fertilizing and doing all the stuff, and then when you finally get to harvest it, that's the last step. That's the sound design and the VFX and stuff like that. So as far as picking what to choose and what not to, it was what serves it's really just what's going to make this the best experience to play. What's going to make people have the most fun with it, and what do we have time for? You have to have constraints, because if any project you see when they're just like, we have no constraints, we can just go forever, well, they tend to do just that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of the thought process. Just how do we were so happy with how it was turning out, and like how it was when you get when we started to get the moments where the bugs started clearing out enough that we're like, okay, you get those magical moments where like, oh, this is working, this is gonna be really fun. We're just like, how can we just make sure the highest percentage of people that buy this game get to have these moments? You know, like it's a shame.
Yeah.
It's a shame if we, or if we're glossing over problems only to focus on the highlights, and then people end up getting distracted by the problems to the point that they don't get to see the highlight. So trying to just get it in a way where we can get it out the door, and thankfully, I feel like it was.
I'd like to think that it was pretty successful in that standpoint.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely done really well. Like we feel like you guys gave us a big vote of confidence in terms of being like, yes, that's the direction we want you to go. And essentially, it's like basically funding the research, right, to keep going on that avenue. You hear it over and over again, where it's like the consumer votes with their dollars, and they really do, because it's like ultimately those dollars are what pays for people's salaries and pays for more people's salaries to work on that, So yeah.
Is that also how the thought process of updating the game was? Was it more thought out? Was it for like 1.5 and 1.6 and stuff? Were all of those just thoughts that came in after the game was launched, or were they more thought out before?
A lot of that stuff was a combination of, there are things that we wanted to do more of, because you get into this a very good way to limit the scope of what you're doing is to not like fully cut something, right? Is to promise yourself like, oh, we'll get in there later, So definitely stuff like the zombie warehouse and the pistol course was that. The pistol course was exactly that. Like, we felt like the encounters that were done later in the game were also amongst the best, and that's why. I mean, hopefully that's the trend that you're on, right? Is that as you do more and more and work with the tools, you keep getting better with it. So it'd be a shame not to do like the pistol course and do like have Chris apply everything that he learned, as he was doing it, and make another fun thing to get out there. And then with Cameron, with the zombies for the warehouse, like playing around with essentially jointing the zombie, like pulling them through a window, letting them use zip line, stuff like that, like just getting a little more versatility with the enemies, because the enemies were 90% of the time in the enemies was spent on the physics and the core of it, just getting it working, and then the 10% was on the actual behaviors of them are pretty limited compared to what we'd like them to do. And so now we can do another pass on that and keep filling out the behaviors and explore it, and so that's half of it. Half of it is like stuff that we wanted to do before and getting it in, and the other half is getting to take the temperature of you guys, like putting out an update, like, oh, we think this might be the direction to go, let's see how people respond to it, and so it's sort of taking the temperature and seeing if that's a direction we want to, if you guys respond to it or not as something that excites you a lot, or if it's kind of just like a lateral move.
I was saying with that, surely the videos help with that too. Then, right? You get to see like the response to people through the videos that are posting like on your channel.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. The videos are interesting. The videos they kind of have a different utility because an update lets you guys get the hands on it too, so you can actually feel it. And a video is just sort of me describing how it feels and showing it to you. So
Definitely can tell the difference when if you're watching a video and then playing it.
Yeah. So there's certain things that I think the videos work better, where it's like trying to explain it, and then there's other things where it works better to let people feel it at the same time. And the nice thing is now that it's out, we can do that more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you ever have to balance game feel with physics? Like either keep balancing out some of the physics in order to make the game feel better? Or do you think that the physics is like the whole game feel, and that's what people find fun?
My thought on it, and I put a lot of thought into that. It's I try to keep it as pure physics as I can because I know that's what's going to allow it to scale more naturally. But often, if the physics aren't feeling good, rather than it being like I need to override this, I try to figure out. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out if I'm missing something. Like for example, with that like I was talking at the beginning, the triangle and the working on the different forces that your spine twist can add to your arms and like how your body works. I still think that if you could get everything perfectly tuned to the model of a real person's body and how you do, then you'd have the expected amount of force when you're doing every different thing. And then you could boil it all down to just a couple different tune variables, like just overall, are you a bodybuilder? Are you strong? Are you fast? Are you slow? Are you weak? And just have a few sort of primary things. And if everything else was in balance, it would all just sort of work. That's my thought. I think there's almost always an explanation that can be grounded in the actual like way your body works or the way your muscles support motions that can explain what it is. So that's my big thing. So it's sort of a hybrid of both. Is I'm trying to make it feel better, but do it with physics, and in that way we have consistency between like you can roll out the same change to 1,000 different objects and not have 100 of them that feel way off because of it, because you're just trying to get a more accurate representation of what you're actually doing and apply it to everything.
Gotcha.
If you figure like most of the scale, like you look at AAA teams, a lot of their core engineering teams aren't much bigger than ours. They'll have a lot of different teams working on different systems, like an RPG system or the menus or all sorts of different stuff. But the actual like, if you take like Breath of the Wild for example, the actual core group of people that coded the gameplay, right? What Link is doing is a pretty small list of people. It's pretty similar to BoneWorks. The scale comes in all the artists and all the different items and all the different, and the people that are coding different scenarios, the different quests, the different paths of things. That's where that scale gets. And so if you want to be able to make changes to the core without having to go through and retune everything, we have to try to keep things consistent and simple. So yeah, that's the long-winded answer. That gives you that. Yeah, because I hear it with pretty much. There's very little critiques of BoneWorks that I don't agree with. When somebody like when someone has either something, whether it's a good or bad thing, when they say something good about it, I'm usually like, yes, I do. I agree. Like I'm like I think we did do a good job at that category. When someone has something that they don't like about it, I tend to agree as well. I tend to think that I don't find a lot of people to be flat wrong in their analysis. Often they'll misappropriate what they think the cause of what's making it feel wrong is, but that feeling of something being off or something that could be improved, I think is usually pretty accurate. Because that's how I look at it. Like I go through different phases where sometimes I play it and I'm like, man, like I'm really happy with how this, and then there's other phases where some days you look up and you work on it and you're like, man, I've got so much work to do. This could be so much better.
Yeah.
I've got a question about guns. So you know the guns with the stock, like the rifles. It feels like they go through your body when you push them against your shoulder. Is that like done on purpose, or have you tried like a physical shoulder and it not work?
I can show you where. I'll save that. I'll just describe it. I won't show you for now.
Okay.
So what I've been working on is a right now in my scene, the gun's shoulder to your entire torso. So essentially, you can pull it into your tummy, you can pull it into your shoulder, you pull it to your other shoulder, and essentially it has around the butt of the gun. I'm doing what boils down to a calculation. It's almost like a soft body representation, because what I don't like is the hard stop. You know, when your gun hits the collider on collider, and you're like the Tin Man trying to shoulder a gun.
Yeah.
So the goal is to code it as sort of a custom soft body interaction between your body. Like imagine like a lathe that goes out from your head down to say about your hips as being a region that you can shoulder against. And I think that will be, the version I have right now is it's doing it all just in overrides to the hands. So it directs the hands. Like if you try to pull it the gun into your body, there's never a hard point where it stops, but the response diminishes to the point that you can feel the resistance of it against your body.
Yeah.
And then right now that's just on the guns, but the goal will be that ultimately that we could extend that to everything. You know, like if you're carrying a wood crate, we'd ideally want it to be able to, to do the same function, rest against your body. And then rather than doing it just as math, there'll be a physical joint there too. So it'll hold it and resist it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm working on it. And I thought is there so many actions that you do with your body. Like this is just in no particular order. The wish list is like, be able to put something in your armpit, right? Like to be able to just like put the butt of a gun under your arm and then hold it and then use both your hands for a bit, and have it stay there. I'm like, I don't have a clear answer of how to do that yet, but I think it's possible with current hardware. And then the other thing is we know that better body tracking is coming, right? With Connect, Akos was talking. They didn't talk very much about it, but they talked about the body API, which is essentially just adding full body tracking to the Quest. Now, what that turns out like when it's done, I don't know. So I haven't had a chance to actually see it yet. But that's the direction they're going on. Is using the lower cameras to look at where your body poses and come up with it. And we're hoping that ideally that gets rid of like the height check step. Ideally, it could just tell you how tall you are. Ideally, that tells us where your pelvis is, so we can align body slots to your hips. And then you look at currently with like Steam VR, you can add tracking pucks and you can do full body stuff. And so if you did that, you could do both. But that's we can't even get started on that yet because it's not out yet for developers. But that's the direction it's going, right?
I've got a question about how you solve your torque on your hands. It's gone through like a couple iterations since the game came out, right? I've noticed it's changed a little bit here and there. Are you solving that using like the inertia tensors of the hands, like the combined system of the object and the hand, or are you just using like a base force and then multiplying it?
It's using the current version of it is using. Let me see, what is the current version on the build right now versus what I have. Yes, it's using the inertia tensor of the hand, and then it's also using the combined with when you grab onto an object. I take a snapshot of the pose between the hand and the object, and then recalculate an inertia tensor to give additive force. If you say you're holding a long stick, right, the inertia tensor suddenly becomes very different for twisting or for swinging. And then when you're two-handed, it's a lot less of an inertia tensor thing because usually most of your leverage comes from the relative positions of your hands when you do that.
It sort of becomes self-governing once it's two-handed. It's that single hand has always been tricky to make it not floppy. Yeah,
the biggest part of that is to do a PD controller. Is to drive both the velocity as well. If you look into drones at all, drones will fly with a PID controller, right? Which is integral derivative controller, and that is essentially those three things. It's like one's a spring, so if you're far away from where you tell it to go, it goes there. The second thing, the derivative term, is a spring to the velocity, though. So it's like if you're telling it to go 1 meter a second and it's going half meter a second, you spring the half meter a second to the 1 meter per second. And then the integral term is tracking error over time. So if you've added the force but it's still off, like for a drone, say the wind's blowing and you tell the drone to move to the right, but it's going into the wind and it undershoots its target, it'll adapt to that over time and add more force. And so physics controllers in VR are very similar to that. But thankfully, we don't have to worry about noisy sensor data. Like we don't have nearly as much IMU jitter. We don't have wind going around. Or if we did have wind, we'd know exactly the speed of it. We don't have to measure it. So working within a physics engine is actually really nice for that sort of stuff because you have a much more controlled scenario. But it's the same
you can get those values.
Yeah. So everything's sort of using a sort of a PID controller. In BONEWORKS, whereas you're driving things with both the position, the displacement, as well as the displacement from the velocity, as well as if it's undershooting over time, because the big thing is we can't count on the player actually holding an object, because if they hold the object and they're joining to it, then we know, hey, I'm holding something. I'm holding a gun. It weighs a kilogram. But if they're holding onto the gun but they don't close their hand, now it's just a collision that's created that. So that's where the sort of integral term of the forces come in.
Yeah. I'm actually surprised you use the I in your PID, because usually that's quite a chaotic value. How are you getting the base value from that, from the error?
I take the expected delta from the last frame. So I take a snapshot of what it's moving at, and then I know how much force I applied to it, and so I have the expected velocity, and then the next frame I check how far did you deviate from the expected velocity.
Oh, that's super interesting.
That's the I term. So it's it's always thinking ahead of expectations versus reality, right? So yeah, I'm moving my hand down evenly, and then I hit the top of a wall, and I'm going to try to climb on top of it. When I'm moving it down evenly, it's ending up almost exactly where I expect it to be, and I can measure the weight of the hand is true. So it's like solving out. You're almost testing it. When you add forces to it, you're testing how much did it affect it, and then solving for mass, solving for resistance. So then when you push down, you hit the top of the wall, suddenly your hand stops moving, and it goes, oh, I'm getting resistance. How much resistance? It's like, oh, I'm getting my full body weight, or I'm getting half my body weight because you're using both of your hands or whatever, anything in between, and then I adapt to that. And so that's why when you climb with your two hands, but you're not able to grab anything, it's still able to lift you up, because it goes, oh, it got, the player weighs about 80 kilograms in BONEWORKS, so each hand ends up solving for 40 of them.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, because you figure at the same time, and the beauty is, because it's a simulation and I can actually measure it, I know, I give it hints, right? It knows the weight of the body, it knows stuff like that. So I kind of have, in the event that you are grabbing into something, you're grabbing onto a static wall, I can already just tell it with two hands, hey, you're grabbing onto a static wall, you have 40 each.
Yeah. It's sort of like modeling how the brain would interpret these forces, right? It's like, you can feel these forces physically, and you're just sort of trying to emulate what your brain would be doing in that situation, so it matches up with reality better, right?
Yeah, that's what's interesting, right? Is that you do this in real life whenever you pick up your 32-ounce big gulp of soda, and you think it's full. You think it's full, but it's empty, and you lift it up because your brain is the neurons in your brain are modeling themselves to anticipate the force and to sort of ready the amount of force that you need, because there's a time delay. So your brain's already compensating for latency between the sensors, which is how much did it move when I gave it this force versus expectations, and you can feel that latency and how fast your brain compensates for it. And so that's what I've been trying to sort of model into BONEWORKS, is that same idea that you have expectations, but my expectations are really good, because in reality, when you look at if you look at a gun or something like that, you're like, that weighs about this much. Well, in BONEWORKS, when you grab that gun, I know exactly how much it weighs, because it's a game engine simulation. So I can just tell it how heavy the gun is. It doesn't have to measure it, but I can then course correct based on maybe that gun's got two guns stacked on top of each other. Maybe there's another hand pushing down on the gun. Maybe there's, who knows,
Mm-hmm.
But
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Some point. So you were mentioning about the sort of combining the inertia tensors when you grab an object. So when you grab, say, like a crowbar, and you're sliding your hands up and down, does that mean you're dynamically calculating that inertia tensor as your hands are sliding up and down?
For the crowbar right now, the pose, I believe I have it updating only when you lock in, when you close your hand. Like when your hand's loose, I'm having it just it's sort of freewheeling so the inertia tensor is locked in with the.
Okay,
If
makes
there's
sense.
one hand that's locked in and one hand that's not, then I'm doing it. I'm only really snapshotting it when it's
Gotcha.
locked in, I think.
I have another question about body tracking. Just hopefully this will be quick. So ideally, VR will be getting better body tracking, hopefully. So we'd have to be relying less on things like IK, right? So right now, the IK and the physics are sort of working backwards, right? You're starting from the hand and then working backwards to the forearm. But if we were to get better body tracking, do you see any value in sort of like and try to model reality better? You would start sort of from the center of the body and work outwards towards the hand. So you would be adding torque through the clavicle, down to the shoulder, down to the elbow, to meet where the hand position is. Like, instead of like conjuring up forces out of nowhere, you're sort of propagating torques through your body like it would in reality. Do you see any value in doing that eventually?
Yes.
Okay.
no, I'll give you the better answer is so I think people falsely assume sometimes that a perfect body track would replace all the IK. So the way that BONEWORKS works, let me go back on. Lost it. There we go. Okay. All right. So in the player, all right, you guys can see this, right?
Yeah, it's good.
Cool. So in the player, there's a lot of you guys have dissected the player. Well, we put this in the museum as well. We showed the different rigs of the player. So the thought process on that is that, well, right now there's two controller rigs because we have the Steam rig and the Oculus rig. Just to get that out of the way, we get a lot of questions like, "Oh, are you working on, or which version are you working on right now?" It's like the way we set it up is that when it builds, we have it so if you're building for the Rift or the Quest, it just uses the Oculus camera rig, and if you're building for PC for Steam, it uses the Steam controller rig. And so essentially, when we work on it, there's never a day where I'm never having an Oculus day and a Steam day. Every time we're just working on the same project. And then the only difference, we try to keep it abstracted enough that the difference goes to all the same changes propagate to both things. So the controller rig, the thought behind that is that's all the user input. That's the actual track. That's where we take that track and we sort of refit it for BONEWORKS, and we synthesize all user input as well as that. So we take the track of your head and the track of your hands as well as your button inputs like a joystick, and then combine that all into one order. So everything else down the line, once the controller rig processes, doesn't know whether the input was coming from you physically moving or from the joystick or for the artificial crouch. So only the controller rig has that information, and after that, it's just movement as far as the system's concerned. Then the next step is we go to what we call the real-time skeleton rig. That's where all of the interaction stuff that I was talking about happens, where we have we take the input where your hands are like saying to be 0.7 meters apart, and you're like, well, actually you're holding a gun right now with two hands, so they can only 0.5. And so that's where we do all the math to take it and constrain the system, constrain your input, like interpret your input into the action that you're doing in the game. So the first step is just combining the sensor fusion of the sticks and the track. The second step is taking that finished track and combining it with what your current state in the world is. Like you're grabbing something, you're two-handed, you're climbing a wall, you're whatever you're doing. Then once that's all solved, it passes it off to the physics rig, which is what actually applies the force, calculates the forces so that the physics can try to do that. And then the final step once the physics solve is that the art renders, the art does its IK to stitch together a result. And that's why I say that there's not necessarily a time where if we had better body tracking that we just ditch the IK, because the body tracking is not going to be necessarily where your body ends up. Where your body actually ends up defers to what the physics did. So even if you have a perfectly tracked arm, say you're holding a big heavy weight and it's pulling down, you're still gonna have to do the IK to that new spot. But that said, it's like the body tracking is much needed, because that just gives us more ways for the user to input in more accurate ways. Like, for example, right now, I have to ask you guys if you're sitting or standing. When we have the body tracking, ideally we get to the point where it's like we don't need to ask the user if they're sitting or standing, or if you transition from sitting to standing, we'll just know in the moment that that's what happened, and we can change the system on the fly. And so ideally, it doesn't require as much input for you guys for height and stuff like that. And then in the same time, that track can also then further inform things. Like if I know exactly where your hips are, then I can put the grab point to be a blend between where your actual hips are and then also where Ford's hips are. So Ford might be crouched and you might be standing, but I want you to still grab. You could either grab where Ford's hips are crouched in the game world, which is a little awkward because it's behind you, or you could grab at your real hip, but you'd see your in-game hand go to your hip. That's sort of the dream of where it can go, but that's all waiting on a cleaner body track right now. As far as so we haven't even started the R&D process on that.
Is there already plans to implement update? So, for example, the climbing of the zombies in Zombie Warehouse. Is there any chances that will be implemented into like the main campaign or story?
We haven't talked about doing a pass on the main campaign. I think that's like more like a remastering. Right now, I think you guys would prefer that we do a new campaign to a remastered campaign. I just bought Final Fantasy VII Remake this year. You know, that was 20 years, so that was too long of a gap before doing it. At some point, I think there'd be a time where it makes sense to maybe remaster some of these things, since they are core pieces of the canon, the story we're trying to tell. We want them to resist aging to some extent, but we also don't want to slow down giving you guys the next chapters in that book just because we want to remaster things. One of the criticisms we have for a lot of VR development right now is it seems like not nearly enough iteration amongst the people who have found success in VR, and instead focusing on maintaining those titles too long. Where it's like it's good to maintain the titles, but it's also we're sort of starved for new thing. Like there's not much of a list of things that people are looking forward to in 2021 right now because there's not a whole lot of stuff announced. And so it'd be nice if some of the people that have found success in the VR step up and fill that. I can apply that same critique to ourselves because we haven't given you guys anything to be looking forward to yet either. So we're looking to correct that down the line here.
Will you guys ever add like feet and like leg tracking to the IK?
Yo.
Somebody else answered it for me. No, that's not the answer. I think so. I think down the line, but the way I would do it is in a very complicated Brandon way. My thought is that so someone earlier said that the IK solve is working from the hands back. So the way our IK solve is actually a little bit different than that. The way our IK solve was it starts with the head, and it works from the head down the neck. And then from the neck, it looks to the hands to define the twist of your T1, your vertebra, your rib cage. And then from there, once we have the twist of your rib cage based on the hands, then we essentially stitch together your from your clavicles to your hands. So that's the IK, right? From your hands to the clavicles. And then we solve down the spine to the ground. And the way I think of it is that your feet it's like a blend from head to toe is a blend from it's a blend from like the most absolute user input and then the least absolute user input. So even if we get foot trackers for your feet, those are going to be the most deferring to the physics world. For example, if you're standing on a staircase, like over here, like in reality, your feet are going to be flat on the ground, right? Let me grab the board over here. This is the hand pose capture tool. We completely replaced the entire hand pose system. So we have our own custom animator now, so we had to convert all of the animated hand poses over to our own data structure. This is what but anyways, yeah, if you're standing there, like in reality, you're going to be standing on the floor like this. But what we want is, so your foot trackers will be down here and down here. And now this is just me. This is my thought process on it. Actually, you probably like split, right? So what we want to do is, even if your foot trackers are telling you you're there on the stairs, we'd want your foot to still be up on the stair and your other one to be down. So essentially we're displacing where that is. And we'd be much more willing to do that with your legs than we are with, say, your head or your hands. So your head is the most absolute. The hands come in second. And then as you go down the spine, you blend. Essentially, the way I think of it is like your head is reality, and then we blend to the virtual reality is your feet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the way we would do, so if we were to do foot tracking, the way I'd want it to do, it'd be like a suggestion for where you want your foot, and it would sort of defer to the world. Like, so like say you stood with 1 foot forward, your left foot forward, and your right foot back. As soon as you start running, your feet aren't going to like run with your left foot forward and your right foot back. That would be like, you'd have this like weird gallop, right? Instead, when you start running, it would just go to a normal run. But then when you stop, maybe the feet come to rest a little bit like what you are. And if you pick up your foot off the ground, now you're sort of suggesting, you're giving it more like cognitive user input. Then when you pick up your foot, we can blend from whatever the solve is to that. And so that's sort of where my head's at on it. Don't hold your breath though, because I haven't started at all. That's but all the IK is set up. Like the IK can take a foot target right now if we give it to it. We just haven't set up anything like to support the traditional foot tracking, because right now we'd want it overridden almost all times. But in time,
I have a question.
Go for it.
What do you think about other games with like full body, like IK stuff, like Card Bullet, or like
Card Bullet?
Yeah, like.
I like it. The most full body IK I've seen is VR Chat, and it's awesome.
I mean, there's a lot of full body games like.
Oh yeah,
I believe
Hell
Blade
Split.
Sorcery has. Yeah.
Hell Split Arena is another good one. With full body.
Yeah,
There
I think it's fun. That's what I think. I think it's good. Yeah. It's right now our focus has been trying to stick with what we know 100% of VR users have, and how do we focus on doing the best we can with that, assuming that. The cool thing will be, as the new like baseline, as a larger percentage of users have access to it, it becomes more useful. Like it's always a solve for like, it's like doing, even if it's fun and it's what we want to be working on, if it's only for a smaller percentage of users, it's like the priority wins out for stuff that everybody can benefit from. But as that number increases, which it surely will, then the value to you guys goes up. So yeah, that's my thought on it. It's awesome. It's something that we'll do. I think that when we do it, I'll want to kind of give it my own take, because I think it can be much more abstract than what people are doing right now.
Seems like with all this talk about body tracking, that the end goal for VR games is like centering gameplay around the player's body, using the whole body as a medium to interact with the game world, and you're getting like emergent gameplay out of that. I already think BONEWORKS does a little bit of that. Just want to know what you think about that.
I mean, if you want to go super end goal, the super end goal is that your body doesn't move, and that it's just you control with your brain. It goes full brain computer. That's not today, right?
No, maybe not tomorrow.
Maybe not tomorrow. I wouldn't hold your breath for it, but it's coming. The interesting thing is that we went from the point of, in the last few years, we went from the point of it not being a thing to it being a thing, right? Or it's like we are going to be able to do more brain computer interface stuff. we're pretty far away from being able to do, like the whole sci-fi look of like you're just laying there, right? The Matrix look, right? Like that's a long ways away. But as far as using your brain to do more input, I think you'll see that coming. Especially VR headsets are really good for that because there's already so much hardware on and around your head that you'll see over time adding more sensors to that.
Yeah, we can like keep the head, like you can use VR headsets to render images and see that with your eyes, and you can do the inputs with a like Neuralink, so you can like have full control over your body and you can see that with your eyes. Like that's even good enough.
Yeah, that's
Because if
right.
something,
We got shown like the Matrix look, and the Matrix look was okay. It's overriding everything, right? It's just tapping right into your head. But
yeah,
in reality, we're getting so good with our headsets, and we're like, you never hear anybody talk about like, oh, imagine what brain-computer interface audio is going to be like. You're just going to be able to hear everything. It's like you can't get anybody excited about that because they're like, well, I already have that, because your headphones are so good. But we're seeing that happening with vision now too. Like VR headsets are getting good enough, and they're going to keep getting good enough at a rate faster than brain-computer interface. So it's like almost the same way that headphones are to brain-computer interface now. The eyes could be the same thing. So our reality, like realized version of the Matrix, would be you're wearing a headset and headphones, and you're doing input that you couldn't do with your headset or headphones via your body. So it's much more compelling to work on haptics or body awareness or dealing with like the interocular mismatch, so like making the sickness go away with stuff like that.
yeah, because like that's what we can solve. Like for this place in 5-10 years, VR headsets like will be really really good.
Yeah, and the cool
So
thing
you
is
can, like,
the stuff that we can't solve is really low resolution compared to the stuff we can solve, right? Like your optical nerve has such fine resolution compared to your sense of balance. Your sense of balance is really crude in comparison. So it should be way easier to go after that with brain-computer interface than going after vision.
Also,
So
like it will solve the whole problem of like foot tracking or interacting with objects in virtual life because like there is no feedback. If you like get a Neuralink in 10 years, we could solve that all, which is like pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so exciting. Is I think you never had much momentum behind the brain-computer interface stuff before because everything was always framed as like not in our lifetime but someday. And just in the last few years, we've seen a transition where everybody suddenly went like, "Oh no, this can be in our lifetime," and we're all naturally we're all selfish in a way that we're gonna work on stuff that we believe that we're gonna see in our lifetime, right?
I mean, we did get finger tracking and all that.
What's the most fun part of developing BONEWORKS? Like the best feature or anything like that to develop?
The most fun part, I like just striving for to try to realize how good it can be. Something that I've observed my entire career so far has been that the bar for content has been lowering, right? Like I was part of this and with YouTube, and that like the level of content that you saw on that was being pushed out to movies and TV was not as produced as or was more produced than the viral content, right? And the barrier of entry of YouTube has made it so you can have lots and lots of stuff and lots of different media going out, and you're seeing sort of this trend where like you look at like Netflix compared to what would come on movies, and the bar for quality of content is lowering. VR kind of stands in stark contrast to that, where it's like this is more labor intensive. There's more R&D to do than traditional gaming, and so it's kind of flying against that direction. And so a big part of me, well after we were confident that VR was here to stay, was kind of that nagging thought of, well, everything else that you can observe in media is going for more. How much can you reduce the price to produce content per hour per minute? Whereas VR is a premium, naturally a premium thing. But the cool thing is that people have engaged with VR enough that despite it being a premium thing, there's clearly an appetite for it, and that appetite is growing exponentially. So my fears of that of like, there was a gap there where it's like, oh, VR can be great, but I don't know if enough people will vote with their dollars to support the developers to realize its greatness to the point that it can kind of gain that momentum. and thankfully it gained that momentum. And so now at this point, we have no concerns over that. It's sort of just off to the races, and then people are asking for more. But in the same way, like you're seeing a lot of games that are coming out are, so you're seeing 5-star ratings. You're seeing everybody, people are like, this is great. And the feedback is not, well, no, that's coming out wrong. I don't mean that things shouldn't be having good ratings. It's all relative to the time they come out. But I just want to make sure that we're not getting complacent and saying this is it. Let's just make more games exactly like this. I think that each game can still take a large jump in terms of the quality of, quality is even the wrong word. It's just the keep pushing ourselves to keep doing the R&D. Essentially, the job's not done, even though the momentum is there, where VR is selling really well, and there's more and more headsets out there, and the customer base is growing, and it seems like it's hit that good enough point where the equation is there. People are buying it. People are buying content for it and coming back and saying, please, sir, may I have another, right? We need to keep pushing and pushing, because my thought is that everything that's out right now, I feel like we're in like that sort of PlayStation 1 era, where at the time PlayStation 1, like the games all look great, but now you go back and you're just like, man, these things feel pretty unplayable. I think that unfortunately a lot of everything, BoneWorks included, I dream that that's the case, because if BoneWorks feels as unplayable as a PlayStation 1 game, that means that we have really awesome VR in the future, So my goal is to be the person that does that to it. I want to keep pushing it and keep sort of realizing what's in our head, get what's in our head out in a tangible product, and then every time we do that, we can look further and go like, okay, what's next?
There's definitely been an upswing in the amount of developers that are working on content lately.
Definitely, yeah.
I'm really hoping that people can work on stuff at a high enough quality and get it out in a timely enough fashion that people don't tire of, like, they don't get VR like boredom or whatever in the time between now and then. Because I think for the next year we might be in a bit of a content dry patch as people work on new stuff.
Yeah. You definitely, I think you're going to see there's a bit of a content dry patch going on just industry wide due to the pandemic that's really multiplying it. I think VR probably would have had that regardless, but it's definitely going to be intensified because of it. This is sort of like remind me, check back in a couple of years. A parallel example of this would be with like vaccines, right? There wasn't a whole lot of our top minds, our top scientists weren't really focusing on vaccines before this year, right? You figure it was kind of like a stale space. There wasn't like a whole lot of movement on it. And then suddenly with the pandemic, you have, everybody in the scientific community is focusing on trying to develop vaccines, trying to do that. And so my prediction will be that you're going to see a vaccine for COVID, and then you're going to see that momentum carry over, and hopefully we can keep making a lot of progress on that front. But it's an example of like where the momentum is and where the attention is. That's what attracts the top minds and the top talent. And in the same way with VR, we also recently had the stimulus of like having Quest 2 launch, having the Reverb G2 launch, having Index and Half-Life Alyx, Index last year, but then Half-Life Alyx and really coming into its own this year, right? And like Index is performing way better than I think everybody internally hoped for, right? Like everything's coming back really, really good, and that's created this momentum where suddenly we're getting more people in, and then with like talented developers getting VR headsets and trying it, then it's impossible to play VR right now if you're a developer and not, you play through sort of the content library and then you just want to poke around with it. You want to see what you can do yourself with it, and so just getting into people's minds is sort of getting that momentum and creating that acceleration that we want.
I have to say, coming from like a more standard like game development background before, going into VR is like an entirely different field, and it's so motivating just working on everything in there because it's so like individually compelling. So I feel like a lot of game devs that are already just working on content that isn't VR, as soon as they take a step in it, they might be really, really enticed to keep there. At least from personal experience.
Well, I think that's what initially made the last time we had a big turnover in the game space was with mobile, and with mobile things went really fast because mobile was other than the UX and the gestures and of a touch interface, mobile tended to be faster developed for than a 3D game. And because of that, we kind of piled those expectations on VR, where we're like, oh, it's going to go at a similar pace to the mobile rollout. And then when it went slower, a lot of people went, oh, what went wrong? And what went wrong is that VR is dealing with a lot more input. Is that whereas like a mouse and keyboard game, you have you got your WASD and some other binary buttons, and then you have a single 2-axis float from your mouse that you're bringing in. That's all the input you're trying to synergize. And with VR, you've got a tracked head and tracked hands, and you have all those buttons on top of it. And so just dealing with all of that and the math behind it is just slow going. It takes time. Like there's nothing in BoneWorks that, I mean, we couldn't have rendered as much and we couldn't have had as many objects, but we could have put BoneWorks out in 2016 on launch day of VR, but we didn't know how to yet. Nobody did. It just takes time to go through that. But there's nothing inherently limiting that. There's nothing really that came through. There's no hardware breakthrough. There's nothing that really happened that made it so that suddenly, oh, you can do BoneWorks now. Like we could have coded it back then, but it just takes time to learn how to do it and continue to do that. So
on that topic, did you have like any sort of formal-ish math background when you like went into VR development, like in 2015 or whatever?
No.
So how did you go about learning? Because like, I mean, you seem to be pretty knowledgeable when you're talking about like PID systems and combining inertia tensors. Like, how did you go about like learning all this stuff? Because I've been going through it for the past like probably since February. I've been spending hours like working on this stuff because I've been very inspired by BoneWorks. And you're right, it is a lot of math. And I'm just curious how the hell you went about learning all this stuff, which like it's seemingly so quickly and so well.
So my background with math is that I always liked math a lot. I liked math. Math was my top subject. I liked math, and then I didn't like biology very much. I didn't like chemistry very much because I couldn't visualize it as well. But then I love physics because I could model it in my head with the trajectory of a ball was more tangible to me than chemistry. So I was always sort of drawn to the field. And then when I went to school for film and sociology. So that was not math at all. But I took a lot of elective courses where I would try to fit as much like sort of math and science into there as I could. And then my last year of college, I did something that I'd recommend to anybody that's not in a field that requires a diploma. Is that I decided I wasn't going to graduate my senior year, and then switched my entire courses over. Instead of the stuff I was supposed to take to graduate, I just took whatever I wanted to take because I was like, I'm going into a field. I'm going to do filmmaking. I'm going to do stuff like I'm not in a field like if you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. Obviously, you need that diploma. But for the more creative side of things, it doesn't go as far. And so I definitely took advantage of sort of creating my own education. And then I was doing back in 8th grade. I used to do I coded for my calculator. I got into like coding for my calculator game. So that was my first introduction to programming. So it's kind of always in the back of my head that I wanted to get back to it. And then once we formed a VR dev studio, that's when I started working on math again. So it's just something that I've always had a sort of a natural aptitude for and always enjoyed. And I think that's what natural aptitude for math really is. Like, do you take pleasure in it? Do you enjoy it? Like is it satisfying? And for me, that answer has always been yes. And so it's not hard for me to teach myself it because I enjoy doing it. Like it's easy to say, but it's really hard to replicate. If you don't naturally enjoy it, then it's like, well, then it's not like I don't have any answer for how to go from not enjoying it to enjoying it. I always
right. So were you mostly like self-taught then? Like when you first got into VR dev, you just sort of took it on yourself to learn all this stuff from wherever you could, really?
Yeah, well, I didn't do any coding on hover junkers. That was Kayvon and Alex. And so I was kind of like I lurked and I read through the code a bit.
Whoa.
And so that code wasn't any. So that was all just like kind of me reading the code. And I was learning, and I was kind of sitting there. I'm like, I was getting the itch to get back in there. And then with duck season, I didn't do any of the primary code, but I coded the physics that the shotgun. The shotgun is driven by the very early version of the BoneWorks hands in duck season. So I got that in there, and then I worked with Cameron on the sort of like how the hands are being displaced. And then by the time in between duck season and BoneWorks, that's when it was starting to get to the point where it's like, well, the hands we were able to ship the hands into BoneWorks, and so I just kind of kept going on that R&D path and started doing the whole IK body, and then going from the body to making it a physics body, and then just adding it all together. So yeah, it's just been a lot of I mean, the way to learn now is with Google, just Google things, figuring out how to
Right.
how to Google it. And
I
the
like
big thing with
how-
VR is that there's no resources, so you have to well, hopefully I can fill that in. Hopefully I can be a bit more of a resource. That's sort of my job now. But when I was doing it, obviously there was no resources, so it's all about like finding other things that apply. So for me, it was like looking at the kinematic structure of the body. I would go through a lot of medical papers, and then physics, taking all the drone stuff and applying that to VR. So it's like there's nothing comes up when you look up how to code do physics VR hands, but lots of stuff comes up when you start looking into drones. So it's just really trying to figure out what I could apply from other disciplines into VR. And unfortunately, and this is why it's taken a while to go back to the previous point, is that almost none of that is drawing on traditional game development. It's all pulling in different fields like robotics and pulling in different stuff into VR and making it out of all that.
I like how everybody's trying to sound as sophisticated as possible when around Brandon.
I haven't talked at all.
Yeah, I heard that the forums were I thought there was gonna be memes, guys. What's going on?
I do have a question.
Go for it.
So I just want to know, where did the idea for BoneWorks come from? Like, where did it come from, basically?
Where did the idea of it come from?
Yeah.
How to answer that one? Okay. So here's an interesting loop. I think this is an interesting thing to get out. So Alex and I went up to Valve's offices for a visit. They wanted to show us. It was one of the early versions of their plan for doing the index. What came to the index? So they're like, we're doing controllers, we're doing a headset, and essentially what they gave us was they showed us the controllers and they said, we're making a game, which we guessed was Half-Life, obviously. And they're like, we made these controllers for our game. So we got in this interesting creative space where we saw the controllers and we knew that the game was Half-Life, but we hadn't seen Half-Life yet. So we had no idea what they were doing. So all we had was like, these are the controllers we knew that these are the controllers that Valve are making for Half-Life. This is the direction they think is right for Half-Life. So essentially all we did is when we got to the airport to fly back, we started brainstorming, and we're like, if those are the controllers for Half-Life, what would we do? And it was actually funny because we were in Valve's offices. They showed us, they're like, what do you guys think of the controllers? We're like, well, when I see them, I'm like, we'd like to do like a force pull mechanic type thing. And they all kind of got quiet and they looked at each other and we're like, oh, is that? And it was pretty clear. We're like, oh, that is like one of the mechanics, from Half-Life. But that was just like a sight read of the controller, so you could sort of start inferring things out of it. And so essentially,
is that basically where the force grab mechanic came from?
And that's where the force grab mechanic came from, was because we looked at it and we're like, oh, if you have hands that you can grab, then we should do a force pull. And we were already sort of in this mind space where like VR is less about moving around your room and physically doing everything. Like you don't want to walk over and flip this light switch necessarily if you could force do it. It's like VR is supposed to be a better version of reality, not a mirroring of reality. So like less simulation, more fun.
All right, I'm gonna go.
Oh, go ahead. But yeah, so a lot of BoneWorks' original design was sort of Alex and I just like speculating and guessing. We're like basically just going on this kind of wild tear of imagination. We're like, if these are the controllers for Half-Life, then what should we do with them? And then we started coming up with BoneWorks. So BoneWorks is just kind of us like fantasizing about how far we could push VR with the new hardware. And then the interesting thing was once we made it, we're like, oh wow, this can actually work with all the old hardware too. Like it worked fine with touch. We're like, this works fantastically. It works just as, because we were surprised almost to be like, it works just as well with touch. And then we kind of got into this loop where like, why didn't we think of this before? And it's like, oh, it just took this sort of like mental exercise of thinking what's next to sort of unlock ourselves creatively. And that spiraled into BoneWorks.
So this is kind of a weird comment, but I guess basically you could say this was a tech demo.
I think if anything's not a tech demo, then you're not pushing it. I don't really have any interest in anything that's not a tech demo, to be honest, because in a way, if you're not at least doing one thing that I haven't seen before, then you significantly diminish the reasons for me to be interested in seeing it. You know, like I feel like that's all of gaming. The idea of like tech demo versus not tech demo, like it's not really important because
That's a good answer.
Ultimately, yeah, like, we all want gaming to push as far as possible, and I think for a lot of us, like, I mean, I was in the camp where after playing Half-Life, after like seeing Half-Life 2 in 2004, we're all like, our minds were ablaze with like, where's physics going to go? And physics kept going in games, but they didn't really go that much farther than Half-Life 2. And it took until VR where we realized that was more because of you can only do so much with mouse and keyboard. With physics, there's not a whole lot of stones unturned. Pretty much they covered 90% of it in Half-Life 2. And then once we had VR, we had the track controller, this full 60OF, suddenly it's like, oh, this is where physics can go. VR and physics should be synonymous in that way, because ultimately this is the input that allows us to have that sort of creative input where you want to pose things in a specific, precise way.
So how do you feel about the gameplay in Half-Life Alyx?
I think it's awesome. I think it's something to understand about Half-Life Alyx. So originally we talked about Half-Life Alyx and BoneWorks there was originally this like sort of linking where we were going to do. Our thought was like Half-Life Alyx is for everybody. Half-Life Alyx is going to be so many people's first experience to VR. And then BoneWorks we figured like we figured nobody was going to play BoneWorks before Half-Life Alyx, because originally the plan was that they were going to come out near the same day or on the same day. So the thought was everybody's gonna play Half-Life Alyx first, so like we're like BoneWorks, and then once they finish Half-Life Alyx, they're gonna be like, what else can VR do? And then so we wanted to push. We felt like very free and liberated to push BoneWorks very far, because we're like the entire time we're like, is this gonna be too nauseating? Is this gonna be too extreme? Is this gonna be alienating because we're pushing too far too fast? And we always tell ourselves like, no, everybody's gonna play Half-Life Alyx first, so that way we know that our users aren't going to be beginners. And that's kind of what led to the warning in the beginning of BoneWorks. We're like, hey, this is not for this is going to be best if you've already had some hours under your belt with VR. This is not the best first VR game. And then when schedules shifted around, obviously ultimately BoneWorks came out first and Half-Life Alyx came out second. And so that wasn't the original design that we had in mind. We were hoping that Half-Life Alyx would come out either on the same day or before we did, so that more people would get onboarded. But it ended up working out just fine.
Yeah, I'm pretty glad that BoneWorks came out when it did, because the games that I was playing in VR at the time before BoneWorks came out they were getting pretty stale, because I'd been playing hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, and I had already played through Duck Season, and I was basically just playing Beat Saber and hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades on repeat every day.
I was playing H3 and Blade and Sorcery on repeat every day.
Yeah,
until
Blade and
the game
Sorcery
came
too.
out.
Yeah.
And then I screamed when I first opened BoneWorks, and my parents heard me.
It really was like a surreal experience to open BoneWorks after seeing like all of the development footage that was getting posted to Node and all of that. It felt so good. It was like satisfying to hit play. It was awesome. Truly.
Like when I first looked down, I was freaking out.
If you guys thought you were happy, think about what we felt, man. We were glad that we managed to like get it in a box and get it out the door, because we're like, we were pushing ourselves in so many different ways. Like we to say we bit off more than we could chew is an understatement, right? We kept biting and biting and biting until we were stuck with a sore jaw,
Yeah.
And then so the whole thing was like, try to not add anything more to it, try to just get it into people's hands so that people can play it and have a satisfying time. And so it was really refreshing to get it out to you guys and have you guys like it, because we were we were so tired at that point. We had no idea what we were doing.
Well, you guys did a really good job. I just want to say, and thank you for that experience. It was really awesome. I mean, at the point when BoneWorks came out, there still to this day, there's nothing that I've played that's anything like the experience in BoneWorks. Not even close.
The feeling of playing BoneWorks for the first time and going through like the museum is magical.
Yeah.
I never before have I played a sequence in a video game that had me so hooked on everything.
Exactly.
Everything in the game, especially the first time playing through, is one of the I'm sorry. What I'm trying to say is that you made a real good game.
Yeah, like I want to say something too before I go. I just want to say that, like, thanks for making BoneWorks in general. Over the entirety of quarantine, the game has kept me so entertained, and I just really want to say thanks personally.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Just so we have a stop time, I'll keep this going for 8 more minutes. How about that, guys?
All right.
Nice.
You guys don't
Yeah,
have to worry
that's fair. You need to go at some point.
yeah, just so you guys know that, like, you don't have to worry about if you're missing something, or you can plan accordingly. It's I hope we can give you guys that feeling again. I hope we can give people enough to or give other developers enough to so that we're not the sole source of that either. Like, we want, like, a healthy ecosystem would be there's a dozen things like us coming out. You know, like, we want BoneWorks to be a genre unto itself. And have a lot of stuff that comes out like that. So hopefully we're just going to keep pushing it in the direction that we feel is right, and kind of going with the guidance of the feedback that we get from you guys, and seeing how people respond to different stuff, that combined with our own creative desires. But yeah, just pretty much try to push it and see where VR goes. But there's the beauty is that there's no ceiling yet. It doesn't feel like we're anywhere close to even maxing out what you can do with just 2 hands and a head. Tracked.
Definitely.
So that's why it's like when you start looking at, like, all the more data that's going to come in with their feet and their pelvis and stuff, I'm like, man, we're not done with the hands and the head yet. Like, we still have years to go. It's going to be so much.
Like, imagine VR in, like, just 10 years.
Yeah,
it's hard to do that. It's hard to imagine.
That's the crazy thing, right?
Because right now, 10 years ago, we were, like, at the start with, like, Oculus DK and stuff, and look how far we've come.
It wasn't over
only
10 years.
Yep.
I still remember watching Markiplier play
watching the DK
demos with his old Oculus.
You guys remember Windlands?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
That was
Dude,
like that was the shit 7 years ago, and now
Try that on the
we had
Now we have
Markiplier.
this.
Before the launch of BoneWorks, we had Markiplier over, and he was I don't think he'd hardly played any VR, because
yeah.
Here's like, one time
Dude,
I went
what?
over to Mark's house one time and left a Vive there.
What? Just a little gift from Brandon and HTC Vive.
I had because I told Valve, I'm like, Valve, just send me like 20 of them. I'll give them to some people. And it's like,
Dude, what? Indexes in Japan. Everyone.
Like,
Santa Claus.
And then years later, he came over and he's like, he happened to be in the building for something else. I forget what he was there for. But we're like, oh, you should check out BoneWorks. And we put him in there, and he was just like in the break room. At the time, the only level that was done was the break room. So he was just in the break room for like a half hour, like trying to stack stuff over himself. So he was trying to get himself as stuck as possible. Like, he was taking all the shelves and like putting them over his body. And then he's like, like screaming. And we're like, man, okay, maybe this is gonna work out. This is looking pretty fun.
Yeah.
Were you skeptical before Markiplier played it?
I wasn't skeptical, no, but I don't think anybody was. It was just seeing somebody. It was one of the first times somebody from outside of the office had gotten to play blind. You know, like, it was
Confirmation that, like, yeah, people are gonna like this.
So it was just like, it was one of those things, because we're like, well, we have fun with it, but I'm like, I've been working on this for a year, so I know exactly what to do, and I know what not to do, and I know what to do. So what happens when you throw somebody in there that doesn't know what not to do? And he still had a great time. So we're like, okay, good. We're getting close to be able to ship this.
It's kind of remarkable. It came out as like good in terms of UX as possible, like despite a sort of like development blindness you get.
Yeah, that's the hard. You have to sort of have those touchstones, right, where you bring in somebody else to play it sometimes just to make sure you're not crazy, because you'll forget what people that haven't seen it before will try, and get development blindness.
It's very refreshing to see someone so passionate about pushing a medium so as far as they possibly can.
Yeah, well, we chose VR. A lot of developers in VR, particularly the ones from larger studios that are receiving lots of funding, it's not their first choice, right?
Yeah.
Also, like, they have no forcing function to code a generalized physics model like BONEWORKS did, because like if you're an indie deal, you need to like scale gameplay, and you don't have like as many developers as they have.
Yeah, we're
So
not expected to give a nice stable platform for 1,000 people to add content to.
Yeah, but that's also a little concerning, because like AAA deals doesn't have to have the need to code like something like BONEWORKS physics. They can just like assign one people per like one gameplay mechanic, so that developer just can code that.
I've thought a lot about that, and I feel like I've gotten more positive in the last year about the AAA side of it. At first I was kind of more like, I'm like, man, I wish the AAAs would innovate more. But then my thoughts on it have sort of evolved to be more that it's important to have every role filled, and what the AAAs, where their innovation is, because I think it's easy to think that the AAAs aren't innovating, but what they've innovated in is that they're able to scale things like crazy.
Yeah.
So that's innovation on itself. I heard this on a brewery tour one time. I was in we saw the Stone Brewery down in San Diego, and that's like a nice craft brew. And they were just gushing over Miller Lite and Bud Light, because they're like, you can't forget that making 1 million cans of something, or making 100 million cans of something, is a lot different than making a microbrew. So it's like the micro, they can innovate, but there's innovation onto itself to scale it, and that's what the AAAs have done. So where it feels like the AAAs have stagnated in the sort of gameplay innovation to an extent, what they've really done is they figured out how to make these massive, moving, living, worlds where you can have 1,000 people employed to do it. And to throw shade at that would be wrong, because it's like, well, that's what's creating 99% of the jobs in our industry, right? That's like, you can't be upset about that. Someone has to do that and push that. So it's up to smaller teams like us to sort of blueprint out and trial things out with smaller, less risky team sizes, because we can't have people making bets and gambles on 1,000 people's jobs. It's like, let us make gambles with 10 people's jobs, and then make safer plays with the masses of the labor force.
I do have one question. How did you guys react when you saw all the like BoneWorks inspired games in development pop up, like especially in like the VR physics dev server that you're in?
Oh, it's awesome. That was the dream. That was or like the hope was that if we put it out and we make it good enough, and we kind of give people a glimpse and get everybody on board with what we're seeing in the direction, that other people would pick that up and be inspired and try to draw from it. And that's why I kind of go back. I mean, that's what brings me on today, is that I feel like it's easy for us to get wrapped up into the engineering side of it, and sort of stop posting videos for a bit, and stop, the communication slows down because we're so focused on what we're working on. And I'm trying to balance that better.
Cough, Valve, cough.
You should do these Q&As more often, because we that's at that physics dev channel would love to grill you more about how it works.
Actually, one question before Brandon leaves.
All right, yeah, let's wrap it up. Let's go.
I have a question too.
Give me some lightning round.
Okay, I have one last question, and that is, during the development of BoneWorks, were there any enemies that were completely cut? Because I remember that there was a enemy called a Roller around. I don't know if the name was changed, but was that just a cut enemy?
There was I don't know. Well, there was some that were cut early. So there was some thought towards we wanted to make. There was more of like a Sid from Toy Story. There was this Sid's room type of thing going on, where we were gonna.
Was it? Oh, it was like Was it just like a hunk of different parts or something?
Well, originally there was something that was just a pair of legs, and then just you remember the arms that you see, and the VR arms.
in the range, reloading the guns.
Yeah. So the idea was to make arms that just would grab the floor and drag at you, and then make just a leg.
Dude, Master Hand in BoneWorks.
And then there was going to be a torso, like just a torso that would walk on its arms and its lower body be there. So it was going to be way more like kind of like Sid's room stuff. And then
they Voltron together, no?
God.
Horror section, jeez.
Thanks for cutting that, Brandon. Thank you.
Hey, man.
Thank you for getting rid of that. I probably wouldn't have finished the game if those existed.
Yeah, well, originally the idea was that the story was going to be a little bit more, especially around the warehouse. The idea was that the warehouse was like, was assembling, was where they were, where the sort of like the AI, the simulation had grown this warehouse facility where they were working on manufacturing clones, right, or manufacturing the things. So you'd see kind of like this physical embodiment of it, and then there was me piecemealed out. And we ended up deciding not to emphasize that, and instead to focus on just confine it to being the null body, to this sort of this fork between the corrupted.
That would have been scary.
And yet somehow warehouse is still my favorite level.
Yeah.
My favorite is probably Tower.
I had a
Castle Museum are my favorites.
Yeah, so I have a question about Project 4. Will it follow the same style of linear gameplay from BoneWorks? And if so, are you interested in exploring different styles and different genres of gameplay in future titles after Project 4?
More on that later, but we are working on. We're working on more than one different thing right now. I'll say that.
Great.
I
remember
that. Brandon, I have a question.
Well, before you get to your question, one more thing. We're working on more than one different thing. And one of them falls more on the narrative side, and one of them falls more on the gameplay side of things.
Ooh, I think I know what those are.
I bet you don't.
Yeah.
The Machine King.
Multiplayer
Jimmy
question mark?
Wong. Post-apocalyptic world.
It doesn't involve Jimmy Wong, and it doesn't involve all the Machine King.
Why?
But
maybe
we're also but
Hover Junkers 2.
We're still working on that.
No, that's why I won.
Duck Season 2.
Does it involve multiplayer?
We've been doing a lot of writing on Hall of Machine King lately.
Yeah, yay! I'm
nice.
glad.
Nice.
I'm happy about that. I'm very happy about that.
That really makes me happy.
Give us one sentence about the plot.
Scary.
What?
Never mind.
So,
yes, no, we're working on a bunch. We'll talk more about what we're working on. Things have shifted around as they should because of the state of the world right now.
Yes.
With, work from home, and so we've kind of got different things going. The narrative stuff that we're looking to do is that's bottlenecked right now. In order to get an announcement for that out, we need to be able to cast it. In order to be able to cast it, we need to be able to have an actor, and that's kind of challenging right now.
Wait, you had someone who played like a real life version of Ford, right? Brett Driver.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just have Brett voice all the characters. I don't.
Yeah, what happened with the old
Every character goes up.
pre-release of BoneWorks?
Yeah, we'll talk more about what we're working on, but just know that we're cruising along, and it's gonna be it'll get to you.
Final question: yes or no? Multiplayer at some point? Yes or no?
I want to play it, and you want to play it.
Yeah,
at some point down the road. I mean, given a time frame of years.
They did make Hover Junkers, and that was multiplayer, but that didn't have the technology that BoneWorks had.
What's the number one limitation with multiplayer?
Hold on, guys. You didn't let him answer. Hold on.
The number one limitation is that time and resources that go into multiplayer take away from time and resources of improving the core. And so the thought right now is that it's like, do I network it now or do I network it later when it's better? And essentially, networking is kind of a static amount of effort. And the issue that we have is that I like to try to isolate where my bugs are coming from. And so if I'm not entirely confident in the solve of the core, so I'll tell you this: the pass that we've done in interaction is this is the exact state of it. So the state of the interaction pass right now is that it's been designed from the ground up to support more than two hands. But we only have it set up with 2 hands right now, which means that if we try to add a third hand, I guarantee you there's a bunch of things we need to iron out. So the thought is that if we make it so that it works, we need to be confident in everything, in all the math on the back end working before we try to network it, because otherwise we'll have networking latency, interpolation, extrapolation bugs on top of core issues with the math. And so if we can isolate it to just one or the other, it'll be less work overall to do it. So that's
Can't
caused
wait.
so basically we all wanted to make multiplayer stuff too, but it's just like, don't hold your breath, because it's not even in development yet.
The whole thing, like,
we should end it here, guys.
Game development.
Wait, no, I have.
We should end it here, guys. He said he had to go.
Oh,
No, I have a really important question.
I wanted to ask that question so bad.
We'll do exactly 2 more questions.
Oh, what got you into game development? What got you into game development?
Can I go, please?
Didn't you already answer that one?
I don't know if anyone asked it before. They probably did.
I think he technically already answered that one.
I'll give you a slightly different answer that covers a different angle. When I was in 9th grade, I went to public school, and my public school had textbooks from the 80s. And at one point we got assigned to do career discernment, where they're like, you got to figure out what you want to do with your life. And the first thing I looked up was game developer. Because I wanted to make games. And when I was in 9th grade, that's what I was doing on my calculator. I was coding and doing stuff like that. And my textbook was out of date. And this was like right before the internet, so I didn't have any more up-to-date information. But it said, must speak Japanese. Language requirement Japanese. And I was like, there's no Japanese.
Game developer?
For game developer, because our textbook was so out of date that they're like, Japan was the only thing. So they're like, you have to speak Japanese. So I was like, I'm not going to
Did you ever learn any Japanese?
Nintendo.
I didn't, no. So what I did instead is I'm like, well, what's something that doesn't require Japanese that's like game developer? And then I figured, I'm like, I'll do filmmaking.
Oh,
instead.
Yeah.
And so,
rocket jump.
Oh yeah, and then you said that. Then you said something about to like one of your friends, like, I'm bored of making films. Let's make games instead.
I'm actually torn between filmmaking and video game design myself, actually, right now.
Yeah, I'm currently choosing game design because it's the thing that really switches over is, one, VR felt as fresh and new as YouTube did when we started doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, so the advent of VR was a good reason to start doing game development. And 2, it started to feel very stagnant to be pre-rendering things, like to render something and do it. We were like, real time is just going to keep getting better and better to the point that no one pre-renders anything anymore. So we should switch over to games now.
Yeah,
and that's what made me do it.
Do you think that we're gonna see another YouTube video on the BrandonJLA YouTube channel this year?
Yes.
Awesome.
It's gonna be about Project 4. I'm calling it.
That's a pretty bold assumption.
BoneWorks is my favorite game.
But I'm pretty sure that he was going to release some sort of info, at least a crumb of info, before the end of this year.
I can tell you this. You're going to see a video for sure about 1.6.
Awesome. Thank you. I have something to look forward to this year.
We'll get 1.6 out.
Can you give us a hint? What is 1.6 about? Please tell us.
I'm not gonna tell you what it's
No.
Wait. Everybody, let Brandon talk for a second.
Yeah, let the man leave as well. He's got things to do.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we covered the main things, guys. So essentially, that's. Yeah, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time to.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you very much.
Please do this again.
Thank you for doing this. I hope we get to do it again.
Yeah, this has been really fun.
Good stuff.
It's been really fun.
Yeah, glad you guys could attend. Glad you guys could do it, and yeah, hope you guys got some good stuff out of it. But yeah,
if this does happen again, where should we look?
I really wanted to ask another question.
I didn't announce it, so I guess I should probably announce it more formally. But as it is, we got enough people. So
how did this even start?
Earlier.
What?
Coming in and screaming.
How did this start? Oh, I bought Discord Nitro, and so I wanted to try out the 60 frames per second.
Dang, I missed everything.
That's a good reason. I
missed everything.
You just need that animated avatar now, then you're good to go.
Yeah.
He likes the green
Brandon with an avatar.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I'm gonna go.
All right, we're gonna ask another question.
All right, Brandon.
Have a good one.
Have a good day,
Have a good day.
Bye.
I'll Code fun
It's
stuff.
nice asking one
Yeah,
question.
code fun stuff, Brandon. Come on. Code fun
I
stuff.
can't wait to see update 1.6.
Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
I mean, neither.
Give us
It's gonna be great.
All right, later, guys.
See you
Later,
later.
Brandon.
Later,
Bye-bye.
Brandon.
Well, that was
Everybody
fun.
That was great.
1, 2, 3.
I wish
That
Myth
was
OS was
fun.
real.
I wanted to
This was
ask about
cool.
the doors, the voidway doors in sewers.
I wanted to
Oh,
ask
that's
about. I
interesting.
wanted to ask about like what's the origin of the last 3 levels? I wanted to ask about that.